give you a brief explanation on Article 8. Article 8 is a principle under the Federal Constitution of Malaysia for equality in non-discriminatory manner, where all the people are treated equally before the law and also entitled to get equal protection of the law. The main purpose of Article 8 is to prevent the public from public and government authorities from acting in a discriminatory manner, injustice and arbitrary actions. However, Article 8 does not mean absolute equality. The Malaysian court have consistently said that the Constitution may allow reasonable classification. This means that the law may treat a different group of people differently as long as they get their justice. Equality under Article 8 focuses on fairness and not identical treatment for everyone in all situations. In practice, Article 8 plays an important role in administrative, commercial and employment-related decisions. While the court uses Article 8 to review the government's decisions whether they are rational and have got valid reasons for their decision rather than bias and discrimination. Article 8.1 provides that all persons are equal before the law and entitled for equal protection of the law. This provision forms the foundation of constitutional equality of Malaysia. Equality before the law means that everyone, regardless their status and position, are subject to the law and no individual or authority are above the law, and everyone has access to legal protection and remedies. Equal protection of law does not require the law to treat everyone in the exact same way. The Malaysian court recognizes the concept of substantive equality, which means fairness based on circumstances rather than rigid uniformity. To determine whether unequal treatment violates Article 8.1, the court applies a reasonable classification test which has two key requirements. The first one is there must be an intelligible differentia, which means a clear identifiable distinction between the groups. Second one is the classification must have a rational nexus with the objective of the law. If the both objectives are satisfied, the classification is constitutional. This principle was clearly illustrated in Dana Harta Urus Sendirian Berhad vs. Kekatong Sendirian Berhad case in 2004. In this case, the Dana Harta Act treated the debtors under Dana Harta differently from their ordinary debtors. The court held that this is not violating Article 8.1 because of several points. The first one is the debtors formed a special class involving non-performing loans, and also the second point is the different treatment was rationally connected to the legitimate objective of restoring economic stability during the financial crisis. The court emphasizes that Article 8 permits reasonable differentiation and does not require all persons to be treated identically. In conclusion, Article 8.1 allows different treatment when it is reasonable and justified, but firmly prohibits discrimination where it is irrational or without lawful purposes.
Article 8.2 of the Federal Constitution expressly prohibits discrimination by the state against citizens on specific grounds, namely religion, race, descent, place of birth, and gender. This provision strengthens the general equality principle under Article 8.1 by identifying particular categories that require constitutional protection. The primary Purpose of Article 8.2 is to ensure that public authorities do not make decisions or policies that unfair disadvantage the individuals based on inherited or personal characteristics. It reflects Malaysia's commitment to equality and social justice within a constitutional framework. However, Malaysian courts have consistently held that Article 8.2 applies mainly to state action and public authorities, and not directly to private individuals or private companies. Therefore, discrimination under Article 8.2 must arise from laws, policies, or action carried out by the government or bodies exercising public function. An important development in Article 8.2 is the inclusion of gender as a prohibited ground of discrimination. This constitutional recognition affirms that gender equality as a fundamental right, and courts have held that discrimination based on gender by public is unconstitutional unless justified by law. Nevertheless, Article 8.2 does not prohibit all forms of differentiation. Courts allow reasonable and justified distinction where they are supported by legitimate policy considerations provided by the discrimination is not arbitrary, unreasonable, or unfair. This principle was illustrated in Beatrice Fernandez versus Sistem Penerbangan Malaysia 2005. The plaintiff challenged a company policy requiring female cabin crew to resign upon marriage or pregnancy, alleging a violation of Article 8.2. The Federal Court held that Article 8.2 did not apply because the employer was a private entity and not a public authority. However, the court acknowledged that discriminatory practices in private employment may still be challenged under employment law and industrial relations legislation. This demonstrates that constitutional protection and statutory protection operate in a different way but complementary legal spheres. In conclusion, Article 8.2 serves as an important safeguard against discrimination by the state on specific protected grounds. While its application is mainly limited to public authorities, it reinforces the constitutional commitment to equality, fairness, and dignity, while allowing reasonable distinctions where it is justified by law.
The ways Malaysian courts have interpreted Article 8. Point number 1 is equality under Article 8 does not mean identical treatment. Article 8 of the Federal Constitution states that all persons are equal before the law and entitled to equal protection of the law. At first glance, this sounds like everyone must be treated exactly the same. However, Malaysian courts have constantly clarified that equality does not mean identical or uniform treatment in all circumstances. In reality, society is made up of different types of situation, industries, economics, or positions as well. Because of this, the law sometimes needs to treat groups differently to function effectively. The courts have recognized that instinct of the same treatment for everyone, regardless context, would be actually create an unfairness rather than equality. Therefore, equality under Article 8, understood as fair, and not appropriate treatment, not mechanical sameness. This interpretation allows the law to adapt to real-world conditions while still upholding constitutional protection. The second point is the reasonable classification test developed by the courts. To determine whether the unequal treatment violates Article 8, Malaysian courts applies what is known as reasonable classification test. This test ensures that any form of unequal treatment is justified. The test has two important elements. First, there must be an intelligible differentiation, meaning that group being treated differently must be clearly distinguishable from others. Second, the classification must have a rational relationship with the objective of the law. In other words, the different treatment must logically help achieve a legitimate purpose. If either of this element is missing, the law or action may be unconstitutional. The test reflects the court's efforts to balance fairness with practicality when interpreting Article 8. Point number 3 is Article 8 prohibits unreasonable and arbitrary discrimination. While reasonable distinctions are allowed, Malaysian courts strongly reject unreasonable, unfair or arbitrary discrimination. If a rule or decision treats individual differently without proper justification, it will be seen as violating Article 8. The courts emphasize that discrimination becomes unconstitutional when it is inconsistent, irrational, or lacks valid objectives. This protects individuals from being unfairly targeted or excluded by laws or policies that serve no legitimate purpose. Throughout this interpretation, Article 8 acts as a safeguard against misuse of power and ensures that equality remains meaningful, not symbolic. Equality there is close link to reasonableness and justice, not blind differentiation. The point number 4 is Article 8 is administrative and governmental decision making. Article 8 is especially important in administrative law where government bodies make decisions affecting employment, licensing and business operation. Malaysian courts have held that public authorities must act rationally, consistently and fairly. If a government agency exercises its discretion in an arbitrary or unreasonable manner, such actions may be challenged under Article 8. This ensures that administrative power is not abused and the decisions are made based on lawful and objective consideration. Throughout this approach, Article 8 strengthens and accountability in public administration and reinforce the principle that government action must align with constitutional values.
Point number 5. Dana Harta case justify differentiation under Article 8. In Dana Harta Hurus Sendirian Berhad vs. Kakatong Sendirian Berhad 2004, the Federal Court examined whether the Dana Harta Act violated Article 8 by treating certain debtors differently. The respondents argued that debtors under Dana Harta were unfairly discriminated against compared to ordinary debtors. The court rejected this argument. It held that the differentiation was justified because Dana Harta debtors formed distinct classes involving not performing loans during the Asian financial crisis. This satisfied the requirement of intelligible differentiation. Additionally, the different treatment was rationally connected to a legitimate objective to stabilize the banking system and restoring economic balance. Therefore, the court ruled that Article 8.1 was not breached. Point number 6. Article 8 allows flexibility for economic and commercial necessity. The Dana Harta decision illustrates that Article 8 does not prevent the government from taking special measures during extraordinary circumstance such as an economic crisis. The courts recognize that rigid equality may hinder effective governance in such situations. As long as the differentiation is reasonable, necessary, and proportionate to the objective, Article 8 permits flexibility. This interpretation ensures the constitutional equality does not obstruct economic recovery or public interest initiative. Thus, Malaysian courts interpret Article 8 as a principle of balanced fairness, allowing lawful distinctions that serve legitimate national and commercial goals. Point number 8. Beatrice Fernandez case, limits of Article 8 in private employment. In Beatrice A.P. Fernandez vs. Sistem Penerbangan Malaysia in 2005, the court addressed whether a workplace policy affecting female employees violated Article 8.2. Although the policy appeared discriminatory, the court held that Article 8 did not apply because Mas was acting as a private employee, not a public authority. The court emphasized that constitutionally law is part of public law and Article 8 protects individuals against discrimination by the state, not private parties. However, the court also noted that such issues could still be challenged under employment law and industrial relations legislations. This case highlights how Malaysian courts draw clear boundaries around Article 8 while ensuring alternative legal remedies remain available. Final conclusion, overall, Malaysian courts interpret Article 8 as a principle of reasonable and justified equality. It does not demand identical treatment but recognize fairness, rationality, and legitimacy in how laws and decisions are applied. Point number 7. Gender equality under Article 8.2. Article 8.2 expressly prohibits discrimination on specific grounds including religion, race, descent, place of birth, and gender. Malaysian courts acknowledge that discrimination based on gender is constitutionally unacceptable when carried out by public authorities. This provision strengthens substantive equality by recognizing that certain forms of discrimination require explicit protection. However, courts also stress that Article 8.2 operates within the framework of public law. As a result, the scope of Article 8.2 is focused on preventing discriminatory actions by the state, ensuring that constitutionally protection is applied where public power is exercised.
Hi, today I would like to give a brief explanation about the case that falls under Article 8, which is Beatrice Fernandez vs. Sistem Penerbangan Malaysia, which is well known as MAS. So before we get into the case detailing, I would like to explain what is Article 8, the Federal Constitution of Malaysia. So what is Article 8? Article 8 is all about the law of equality, equal by law and equal protection by the law. So Article 8 is prohibited the discrimination of the gender, race, religion, place of birth, descent, and so on. So it's more to equality. You should treat everyone equally. And the key point of Article 8 is Article 8 is only applicable to state and public authority, and it does not generally apply to private employees or private authority. So what's the connection between Beatrice Fernandez versus Sistem Penerbangan case? to the Article 8. Since Article 8 is all about equality and discriminating, so this case might fall under Article 8, but it does not apply to this case because, as we all know, MAS is a private authority, is a private employer. So moving on to the case explanation, Beatrice Fernandez versus Sistem Penerbangan Malaysia. So the fact of this case is Beatrice Fernandez was a flight stewardess where she was employed by Sistem Penerbangan Malaysia MAS. During the employment, there is a contractual agreement between MAS versus Beatrice Fernandez, where there is a regulation that prohibiting of pregnancy. So what is prohibited of pregnancy is during the employment service, let's say 5 years or 6 years or 3 years, during the contractual term, the particular person should not get pregnant during her service. So in this case, before Beatrice Fernandez get into a contractual to the employment, she agreed to the contractual term that created by MAS, and she was sound mind during the agreement, and she agreed to the rules and regulations that list out in the agreement as well. So she voluntarily agreed to the contract. And then during the contractual period, she was getting pregnant, and MAS was terminate a service because of she getting pregnant. So this termination of the service gave a big impact to Beatrice Fernandez, and she was arguing that this termination and this thing was fall under discriminating a woman that falls under Article 8. So this case was goes to federal court, and the judgment was Beatrice Fernandez is failed to claim this case because Article 8 is only for the public authority and it does not apply to the private sector. And the second thing is, this is a contractual agreement whereby the person who agrees to the contract is fully agreed. The person, which is Beatrice Fernandez, is fully agreed to the contract and she get into the employment. So it's a contractual term. So moving on to the next. So in this case, it is fully agreed by the Beatrice Fernandez, and MAS is not a public authority. MAS is a private authority whereby Article 8 does not applicable to this case, and Beatrice Fernandez failed to success and failed to justify herself during the case. So this is a case detailing of the Beatrice Fernandez versus Sistem Penerbangan Malaysia. So what's the significance of this case? As we all know that Article 8 is only for the limited scope where it's only applied to private public sector. It does not apply to private sector. Public sector is constitutional law, which is public law, and for the private law, it's more to contractual obligations. So from this case, we can understand that Article 8 is only applied to public sectors and public authorities, and it does not fall under private authorities. This is why Beatrice Fernandez was not success in this case. Thank you.
The first case of Article 8 is Dana Harta Urus Sdn Bhd versus Kekatong Sdn Bhd 2004. So this is how the case was. The case arose after Asian financial crisis where Malaysian government introduced Dana Harta Urus Sdn Bhd under Pengurusan Dana Harta Nasional Berhad Act 1998 to recover non-performing loans and financial institutions, where Kekatong Sdn Bhd is a debtor company challenges Dana Harta's statutory power to acquire and recover its loans, arguing that the special recoverable procedures granted to Dana Harta treated their debtor unfairly where compared to their creditors, where there therefore occur voidable of Article 8 which guarantee equality before the law. Next, court's interpretation of Article 8. The Federal Court held Article 8 does not prohibit all form of unequal treatment. Instead, it allows reasonable classification that provide the classification is intelligible and it has a rational connection to legitimate objective. The court found the different treatment of debtors under Dana Harta Act is justifiable. Dana Harta Act serve public legitimate and economic purpose, namely establish financial system and resolving bad debts after national economic crisis. Next, the court's judgmental. The Federal Court dismissed Kekatung challenge and upheld the constitutionality of Dana Harta Act. It ruled that the Act does not breach Article 8 as the special power given to Dana Harta Act was reasonable, non-arbitrary and necessary for effective financial restructuring. In conclusion, Article 8 gives Dana Harta a special statutory power to recover non-performing loans. Dana Harta may enforce recovery without prior court proceeding under Article 8. Ordinary contractual rights and defences cannot defeat an Article 8 notice. Article 8 overrides private contracts to protect public interests and financial stabilities.
To conclude, Article 8 of the Federal Constitution is a fundamental provision that upholds the principles of equality and non-discrimination within Malaysia's legal system. However, as demonstrated throughout the presentation, equality under Article 8 does not mean that everyone must be treated in exactly the same way in every circumstances. Malaysian courts have consistently interpreted Article 8 as promoting substantive fairness rather than identical treatment. This means that different treatment may be allowed where the treatment is reasonable and lawfully justified. The courts apply the reasonable classification test, which requires intelligible differential and a rational connection to the objective. This approach ensures that laws and administrative actions remain fair, practical, and adaptable to real-world situations. The case of Dana Harta Urus Sendirian Berhad versus Kekatong Sendirian Berhad clearly illustrates this principle. During an economic crisis, Dana Harta was granted special statutory powers to recover non-performing loans. The court that held this differential treatment was justified in the public interest and did not violate Article 8. This case highlights how constitutional equality allows flexibility, especially in the Department of Financial and Commercial, when necessary to protect national economic stability. On the other hand, the case of Beatrice Fernandez versus Sistem Penerbangan Malaysia shows the limits of Article 8. The court emphasized that Article 8 mainly applies to state action and public authorities, and not to private employers. As a result, constitutional equality rights could not be used to challenge private employment contracts. These issues private discrimination instead of addressed through employment and industrial law. Overall, Article 8 acts as a safeguard against arbitrary and unreasonable discrimination, while allowing justified differentiation where it's necessary. It balances individual rights with public interest and administrative efficiency. Therefore, Article 8 remains a very crucial constitutional provision that ensures fairness, justice, and accountability, and the rule of within Malaysia's legal framework. Thank you.